You already have an egg tag.
Oh, I do, don't I? Oh, just in case I forget.
They're still the same.
It's better than my memory's getting so good. I should have worn this last couple of times.
I was gonna wear mine.
I need to think about wearing my shirt. No, I'm ready to go. No. Yeah, maybe I should dump some of the knives out. I do have knives.
I'm gonna do, my, hobby on genealogy.
Right.
And that's pretty much what I want to do. But I can't do it on the computer.
Yeah.
Show it on the computer, because I don't remember how to do a presentation.
No.
I used to be able to do it, but I haven't been able to.
Now I was, really go for how to do presentations.
Yeah, so it's gonna be show and tell.
Okay. And then I'll be, you know, I don't think so, as a here as an example. One.
Dudley.
My dog died in January.
Oh, my mother was raised in before.
Three days. Got him here last week.
Mine, he had gotten bladder cancer. And what made it hard was that other than when he was trying to pee, he was trying to do vibrations.
He's the famous king from the different parts. He's from Germany. His brother and his family came a couple years ago and had this. So he got seals on it, so he heard about the vital. Yeah, and then, we were supposed to back to the States this year.
No. I wouldn't either.
Hello. Any more chairs?
Need another chair. You'll sit on the table, at the table?
That's fine.
They put you kind of attic word.
That's always there, but.
Jerry, did you want to be interrupted for questions, or did you want to wait till the end? Or
I'm going to say something at the beginning of
Okay.
my talk about that, but I'm going to like to, both are fine,
okay,
basically. And I don't know if people are watching, do they sometimes send in questions? Are they capable to do that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Very rarely do people watch it,
No worries,
You
I know
never
what
know.
you mean, yes.
but I will if I see anything. I will.
And then you're the boss, so whenever you want to
Yeah,
start.
yeah, I'm going to start here in a minute. I think somebody. Oh, he came back. Somebody had gone out, so I wanted to wait.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Go ahead and get. Huh?
Somebody close the door.
Yeah, please, if you would. Appreciate it. Yeah, because it gets noisy when the sliding door and stuff. People come in and out. Well, thanks everybody for being here today. My name is Doug. I'm the founder and president of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie. And we meet pretty much once a month. We have social activities during the other parts of the month on occasion. We have if you want to get contacted by email, we have an email sign-up sheet and some literature that you can pick up. We also have some snacks, and really good for you to be here. The mission of our group is to create a humanist community in Greater Toledo so that secular people are more accepted and are able to contribute to the general community. Have some kind of announcements. We have a limited supply of T-shirts available. You can order them online if you want them shipped to you. It's an additional charge, but they're $20 a shirt. They look like these. And so, or you can see me after the meeting and arrange to get one for you. Tomorrow from 1 to 2, they are having a protest down the street at Central and Secor with Toledo Persists about the situation in Minneapolis going on. So if anybody wants to do that. I am also working in a coalition with a group called Unchained, asked on a bill to be introduced on the 13th to end child marriage in Ohio. And basically it would ban marriage before the age of 18, period. And the reason, we can't get in a real big discussion about it, and I will later, but basically it can be used for human trafficking and abuse and things like that. Next month, we will be meeting. We're having our first ever chili cook-off. So I don't know if I'm going to have it at 10 o'clock in the morning, because I don't know if people want to eat chili at 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's not definite yet, but it will be next month. And, huh?
No, I was talking.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And also want to advise people that when we do have discussions, the discussions will be moderated and try to be nice to one another and not take anything personally. And we're humanists. We believe that all ideas are open to question, including our own, because we could be wrong. So and that's one of the reasons why we brought today's speaker in, Dr. Jerry Jaffe. And he wrote a book about religious satire post 9/11. And he's going to talk about it today. And let's give a good round of applause to our speaker.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, everyone, for having me and for attending this little session. My name is Jerry Jaffe. I'm originally from Toledo myself. Started high school, class of 86, University of Toledo, 89, and then went out into the big wide world. Got my PhD from Bowling Green, and now I primarily teach at different colleges and universities. I did spend 10 years teaching at universities overseas, 4 years in Japan, 6 years in New Zealand. While I was in Japan, I met my lovely wife and a comfort animal. So, yes, could not get through certain situations without her presence. So, definitely a great comfort. And I virtually and digitally joined this organization a long time ago by joining the email list and Facebook page. But for I don't even know, a year or two, there was never an event while I was visiting Toledo. Like it never coincided. So I just sort of watched from afar. But as it happened, by emailing with Doug over the past couple of months, we arranged for me to come today and talk about my book a little bit. As a primary job is teaching college young adults, and I always encourage my students to interrupt if they have a question. My regular students know I will never stop talking if you allow me to just continue talking. So it never bothers me if someone wants to ask a question. But we will have like a time for Q&A at the end as well. So if you just want to jot down your question or remember your question, you can ask at the end too. And one other thing which is going to come up while I'm talking about this book is I also do stand-up comedy. That's like my side job. It's not my full-time job, but I am in like comedy clubs, casinos, bars, primarily around the Midwest. As I got older, traveling became less appealing, or should I say, traveling for $75 to do 20 minutes of comedy became less appealing. But that is like my side job, and that informed this book. So what I'd like to do now is I'll segue into actually talking about what the book is about.
Can you tell us what you teach?
What the flip? No, of course. Thank you for asking. So my PhD is in theater. So as a teacher, I primarily teach acting and theater classes, Shakespeare classes of that nature. Not currently, but for about 17 years, I taught at a college in the Cleveland area, running their theater program. And I created a comedy minor for that school. So it was the only school in Ohio that had any kind of like certification in studying comedy. So that was, students loved it. I also love to be able to teach to a subject that I love. And then a whole other topic, you'd have to bring me back separately, but my dissertation and some of the other research I do is on like the theatrical aspects of tourism. And I only mention that because there's a strong philosophical slant in my dissertation, and I've often taught like intro to philosophy classes and intro to critical thinking classes. If you teach at a small college, you end up teaching everything, by the way. That's a common side effect of smaller colleges. So I've taught many classes of that ilk as well. What I found in the research that I do is a common moment, which is a combination of serendipity and epiphany, which is to say I'll notice something and I'll go, well, that's interesting. And then it like percolates in the back of my mind as it accumulates almost through instinct or natural observation, like a biologist in the jungle, just like noticing things until it turns into an idea that is like, oh, I need to find out more about this idea. And that's the genesis of this book. So I want to say like one more thing, and then I'll start to get into substance. And as I also want to preview how I'm approaching this talk. So this book itself has 6 chapters. So what I'd like to do is, in a way, spend about 5 minutes on each chapter. And then you'll get like the gist of what the book is about that way. But of course, the first chapter is an overview, and the second chapter is like defining satire, because when you're academic, like the first thing you have to do is define things before you can move on to your deeper thoughts. So the first like 5 to 15 minutes is probably just telling you about the ideas in the book in general. So this is the thing that I noticed. Here's the thing that I noticed at starting this book. So I'm doing stand-up comedy since the early 2000s, so post September 11th. I'm a fan of stand-up comedy going back to high school and college. So since the 80s, of course, there's a big comedy boom in the country in the 80s. So I was a big fan of that, and even doing open mics and things back as far back as then. And so I was a longtime comedy fan, and et cetera. I was paying attention to comedy. But similarly, a whole other thing was going on in the early 2000s, which was all of the high-profile books that came to be called New Atheism. So most of you probably know the books I mean, like Dawkins and Hitchens and Sam Harris, and there are others as well, but those were kind of, in some ways, the big 3. So I'm reading all of those books. And it had to sort of, again, this percolates over time. I just slowly started to notice that comedians who were interested in, let's just say, secular ideas or science, were talking about very similar things that the New Atheist authors were talking about. And so once I noticed that was like the germ of an idea. Oh, there's like similarities here. And then what's the similarities? What are the differences? How does it sort of overlap? And in particular, in the early 2000s, both New Atheism and I think the specific comedians I'm talking about are, clearly reacting to September 11th. Like, that's not some kind of like a coincidence. Dawkins and Hitchens and others clearly are, this is what happens when religious extremism goes unchecked. So we should start actively checking it, calling it out. While Canadians were doing similar parallel activity, calling it out. Sometimes when I've talked about this topic, and I did ask Doug, and Doug did say that there was media if I wanted to use it, but at the last minute I was like, I don't know if I want to get involved in media. I will say there's like a pretty specific video, like if I could show you one clip that encapsulates what I'm talking about. If you know the comedian Lewis Black, so there's a stand-up comedy series called Comedy Central Presents. And I undertook an activity that only an academic or an obsessed person would do. I watched several years pre-September 11th, and then I watched several years post-September 11th with a worksheet that I had invented to take track of different types of jokes I was hearing. And I felt like even while I was doing it, that it's like you were an art historian and you started like trying to document what shades of yellow people used in different eras, it would seem like ridiculous. So I do understand that as an art form, it's sort of hard to take a mathematical approach or an analytical approach of that sort. But I can assure you that there was a clear increase in the number of jokes about religion over the seasons of Comedy Central Presents post-September 11th. Now, I had an opportunity to interview Lewis Black. So I should mention, sorry for rewinding a little bit, but this is like another Lego block that went into all of this. Like every other comedian on earth right now, I have a podcast. And my podcast is called The Comical Heathen. So that's sort of my comedy brand. And I started that podcast specifically to interview comedians about religious satire, thinking about this book. So indeed, in this book, there's probably 10 to 20 times that I quote people that I interviewed from that podcast. But I was able to use my own connections in comedy to get comedians to come on and we talk about religious satire. That included, I was able to interview Lewis Black. And I asked Lewis Black, so let me tell you one detail. Sorry for being scatterbrained, I'm just trying to say it correctly. And that is the very first episode of Comedy Central Presents that was produced after September 11th was Lewis Black. And so they produce these things ahead of time. So if you went literally to like September 16th, 2001, there was a Comedy Central Presents, but that was recorded months ago. So it had no reflection on September 11th. But the next season they made after September 11th, he was the first episode. And indeed, not only did he discuss religious satire or religion, but his whole last 10 minutes of his routine was about September 11th, and very directly. So I asked him if that was intentional from the producers. Did they put him in that spot so they could have this high-profile comedian rant about September 11th? And his quote was, "No, they're not that smart." So, and I do think part of it is shows like that are produced months ahead of time. Even though it's after September 11th, they don't necessarily know what they're going to get, and they're booking different comedians. So if it really is not curated, but a kind of dumb luck, then it really does reinforce that after September 11th, all of these comedians were talking about religion, and some in a much more a direct or acerbic or satirical way. Sometimes comedians talk about religion in kind of a gentle way, sort of just poking fun or even their own upbringing. It's not really very satirical. But some comedians like Lewis Black or Bill Maher, they're clearly, being satirical in a critical way. Okay, so this is what I noticed. This little book of mine is available on Amazon and many other book purveyors. There's a hardcover. They just released a paperback a couple months ago. There's an ebook version as well. There's only one visual graphic in this book, and I'm going to show you, but since I just brought the book and not the slide, I'm then going to pass this book around. If anyone would like to thumb through it and just see any details or just see what's going on. But there's one graphic. I was trying at one point while communicating with an editor to express Because, your editor's going to say, what's your book about? What are your story you're trying to tell? What is your book about? So I was trying to clarify my own thoughts. And I invented a Venn diagram. So first of all, I discovered, I'm a theater guy, not a math or science guy. I discovered you could make Venn diagrams. So I was already excited. Like, oh, I should have fun with this. And what I did was I made 3 circles. One says new atheism, one says religious satire, and one says September 11th. And then right there in the middle is where all 3 overlap. That is what this book is about. The other thing I'm going to show you, I'm going to just pass this around, since I'm using this as an outline to guide my thoughts and keep them on rail and focus, here's the table of contents. What I'm going to do is spend a few minutes on each of these chapters. In fact, I've already started talking about the introduction, because the introduction is explaining what the book is about. Feel free to pass it around. Now legally required to look at it. My little paper slip, should anyone want to see that. There you go. Okay. I want to mention 2 things, and then I'm going to get into the other chapters and get into some substance. One is, you'll see me take my glasses on an awful lot. I've reached that age where no glasses work. So no matter what pair of glasses I wear, they're not quite working correctly. These are my driving glasses. I can see all of you if I wear them, but I cannot see this book if I'm wearing them. So I have to, if you see me fiddle with my glasses, I apologize. The other thing I always mention, my students know this, when I'm doing stand-up, I do jokes about this, is a few years ago I had a throat surgery, and I'm perfectly fine, there's no health issues. But one of the side effects of that surgery was that they tickled my vocal cords. And sometimes when I speak, I have something to say about that. This is Routledge, one of the world's leading publishers. I was so excited to get a book contract with Routledge, but of course it was like their academic wing. That's a completely different story. So they don't do any advertising whatsoever, except catalogs they send to libraries. And currently all their academic books are print on demand. So you can't get them into bookstores because bookstores won't carry print-on-demand books. So, and then as a friend of mine said, who kindly bought the book, said because they use that print, the word ratio per page to cost of this book was the most extreme ratio he had ever seen. He had never seen a publisher scrunch so many words onto each page versus how much the book costs.
It's a little bit bigger than Agate.
It's just a little bit. My father kindly read it, and he's in his 70s, and he asked me to buy him like a reader magnifier glass, one of those rectangles, so he could place it over the page and actually read it. So I semi-apologize, although it's also out of my control, so there's nothing that I can personally do about it. You could always get the ebook and then just make it on the screen any size you want. So at least they have that available. All right, so I was mentioning the tickle in my throat, because sometimes when I do a lot of public speaking, I will suddenly start coughing. So right now, my throat feels fine, and I bet it's going to be okay. But just occasionally, I do get interrupted by coughs I can't control. Doing stand-up, this is a problem. Teaching, this is a problem. Like my career is based on public speaking, and now I have this like little medical condition that haunts me, and every once in a while it flares up. All right, so I just wanted to let you know that should the 1% chance that it happens, you'll know what's happening. If anyone has asthma, one of the aggravating things is when you lose your breath, you can't tell people what's happening, right? So what will happen in class, like once a year, is I'll just start coughing, and then I'll get up and walk out. So I don't want the students to be confused, like should I call 911 or what's going on right now? So I always tell people ahead of time, so in case it happens, you'll know what's going on. All right, so that is introduction to the idea behind the book. So now I'm going to start going through the chapters. Chapter 2 is on defining satire. That is a standard academic approach, define your terms. And in any academic field, like there's controversy and debate about how things are defined. So it's not as easy or straightforward as like someone outside the field might think that it might be. So at any rate, satire is a topic that has been studied since going back to the Greeks. So there's a great history of people trying to address it and define it. And you can find examples of satire and religious satire in the Greek playwrights. So there's a long history. This is not something that was just invented 5 minutes ago. This has been around. The field of religious satire has been around for thousands of years, and people have been studying and talking about it. The field of theater also has been studied since Aristotle. And I think one of the features that makes theater fascinating to philosophers applies also to satire and religious satire, which is, I'll say arguably, but if you think back to thousands of years ago, theater was the first virtual reality. It's like pretending to create alternate realities that then have effects. So why would it be that pretending has effects? That's kind of a mysterious question, arguably. And so that's what Plato and Aristotle tried to decipher. So similarly, we have this language game called comedy and then satire. So there's two things I want to emphasize that come out of my chapter on defining satire I want to share with you. On the left hand, my approach to language is largely informed by a Russian linguist and philosopher called Bakhtin. And if you don't know Bakhtin, that's okay. You can look him up later. He has a very interesting biography and career and wrote many influential books in the field like the 20th century philosophy of language. But one of his key concepts that he developed is the idea of a language having a tension in it between these two words. And one word is dialogic, the other word is monologic. So mono means one. So his idea is that when people attempt to communicate, they have, whether it's consciously or intentionally or just through communication in a natural way, something they're trying to say. There's like a message, there's a meaning. However, that's like an ideal. In, shall we say, practical real life, language is dialogic, and dia means between. So we use the word dialogue in a play, but that's because characters are talking amongst themselves. So it's like between. So dia means between. So when he uses the word dialogue, he doesn't mean it in the same way as theater dialogue or plays dialogue. He means that the meaning, the logos, is created between the people who are communicating. So that means it's a fluid and unconstant. And that is important to think about in the comedy, in my mind, because the main thing, or one of the main tools that comedians have, humor writers or stand-up comedians, is to play with language. So the idea would be, if you imagine whether it's a government or a religion or a teacher, a professor, when they say things, they want it to be monologic. They want it to be the 10 Commandments written in stone that means exactly what they say it means and they think it means.
What we're experiencing right now.
Correct. It's a great irony when I teach this to students. I will tell them, by the way, this is happening right now in front of you. I think I'm telling you monologic definitions and meanings and things that I want you to know. But in truth, we're creating the meaning between us because you're hearing it, you're interpreting it, and it's fluid. It's not written in stone. Yes.
This might be a crazy question.
I love crazy questions.
So with the concepts you're talking about, does that tie into stuff like connotation versus denotation, or is this? Because it sounds kind of similar.
Well, it sounds kind of similar.
Like not the words, but like what they do.
Oh yeah. So denotation is like the literal dictionary definition of a word, and connotation is sort of like the social meaning of the word or the meaning of a word in practice, something like that. So it's those two concepts would be like in the salad, in the potpourri. I don't think Bakhtin, that linguist, ever specifically focused on those two words, but they're definitely related or comparable concepts. I think the thing for Bakhtin is he was really emphasizing the in-the-moment social situation. The two people are discussing comedy, you're hanging out with your friends after a movie, what did that movie mean? And you're creating meaning right there in that conversation. So the reason for me that this is important when you talk about comedy is that comedians love to play with words. And so there's a great example, I use it in the book. One of the comedians I talk about frequently in the book is Mark Maron. So no one's any Mark Maron fans, that's okay. If you ever heard, he did a routine on one of his comedy albums, I think 2011, that's off the top of my head, so I hope that's right, about visiting the Creation Museum down in Cincinnati/Kentucky. And what he did was, for his podcast, he went in there with microphones and just recorded his thoughts walking around. And then that's an episode of his podcast. And then he turned that into a comedy routine that he did on stage, so sort of more polished and more jokey, so to speak. And there's because I write about it in this book, I decided that to be honest, I should go and experience it, so I've been to the Nation Museum. I was not happy about giving my money to that organization, but I thought to be like an investigator, I should go there in person. Has anyone else been to it?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. You know, you're nodding, have you been to it, or?
Oh, no, I was just nodding.
Projecting, imagining the,
I never looked into it.
Um,
I really wanted to go and I reluctantly agreed.
well, the thing is, it's a riot. You just, if you didn't have to give your own money to support that Answers in Genesis missionary work, which is what it actually is, as a missionary institution, not a scheme. And of course, that, to put it kindly, it is full of pseudoscience and misinformation. And then, of course, of a kind of biblical literalism dogma. So there's a room you walk through, a gallery, that is depicting the Garden of Eden. And in that Garden of Eden, on this area, is Adam, and he's surrounded by animals in this like peaceful way. And there's all kinds of animals, including like a huge bear. I don't know if it's a black bear or a Kodiak bear or something, a huge bear. And then over here's a penguin. Yeah, I wish I was making this up. This is exactly what you'll see. And like over here is a dinosaur.
Yes.
But there's a lamb, and Adam, it's like near the lamb or holding the lamb. He's somehow like really close to the lamb. And to tell you the joke I'm about to tell you involves adult language. So this is your adult language warning. Mark Merritt says, oh, then you turn, you see Adam, and he's holding a lamb, which is there to either prefigure the coming of Christ, or he's fucking it, because Eve doesn't exist yet, so what else is he going to do? So that's the idea of like the biblical literalists making this display have a kind of message that is dogmatic and monologic in nature, but you can't control meaning like that. Each person is going to interact with it and generate their own meaning. That's the dialogic. And then for comedians, for me anyway, it's powerful to think about that way because comedians like to play with language. So in this case, he saw the display and turned the intended meaning into a joke, a rather crude joke at that. But that's an example of how I use the ideas of Hakim to explain how humor is functioning. I want to give you one more thing that comes up in my chapter on defining satire, which is a completely different angle. And I want to make sure I say this correctly, so if you'll give me a few seconds to indulge my making sure I say this correctly. Don't help me. I just always want to mention this person. I'm almost there. Paul Provenza. For some reason, Provenza doesn't come easily to the tip of my tongue. It's another well-known comedian. I don't know if you've heard of Paul Provenza or not. Paul Provenza had an early podcast, not quite as famous as a Mark Maron or some other ones, but he is an early adapter of podcasting. And he had a Showtime series based on his podcast called The Green Room. So that's where sort of general comedy fans know him, if they know him at all. It's through this Showtime show that he had. And it was bringing comedians in and talking as if you're in a green room, like backstage, before, after a show, what would comedians talk about? That's basically the format of every comedy-themed podcast now. Like, let's get that green room vibe, and we're just hanging out and talking. So Paul Provenza, amongst comedians, is considered like unofficially one of the great historians of stand-up comedy. Considered to be very knowledgeable and knows the history, has met everybody and collected all these stories. And be that as it may, Paul Provenza published a book of interviews on the topic of satire called Satirista. If you're interested in what comedians have to say about satire, this is a great book. It has many, I don't even know the number, 30, 40, 50 interviews, all with famous comedians. But in the intro, he gives his definition of the word satire, because he said this is what this book is about. And on the left hand, he goes through and says, so here are some classical definitions of the word satire. And that's fine, I'm not even going to go into that. The important thing to me is what he says after that, which is, that's all good and fine to try to come up with academic or dictionary definitions of the word satire, but if you're a comedian hanging out, trying to write jokes or talking to your friends about comedy, you don't think that way. You think about what's going to get a laugh and phrasing things in ways that are funny, whether it's finding material or crafting good jokes or testing them on stage. And so he has this great quote, which I'm going to paraphrase, but he says, asking a comedian about asking a comedian to define satire is like asking a jazz musician to explain what notes they're using. Like most jazz musicians are well trained and know about notes and you can read music, sure. But when they're in the middle of a riff, there's a lot of improvisation in jazz. They're not thinking in that moment, oh, I'm using this note and then this note and these two notes go together because of this theoretical reason. They're just like in this groove trying to make their jazz music. So that's, for Paul Provenza, analogous to a comedian thinking about what is satire. Like it's not even a conversation necessarily that a comedian, I don't want to say they wouldn't have it in an academic way. They have it about what is it like to do comedy. So, for example, many of the comedians that I interviewed, even if they do satire or religious satire, will say how dangerous it is to do satire at a comedy show. Because if you make fun of politics or religion, the fear is that you'll divide the room somehow. Whether it's Republican or Democrat, if you make fun of a president, like if half the people in the room voted for that president, are you going to like turn them off or chill the room somehow? So they say a comedian is not thinking about or talking about comedy usually in these like definitional academic ways. They're thinking like, we got to do a show tonight. We want the show to be good. Comedians I know who I've interviewed or studied who do satire, and Stephen Colbert says this in the Paul Provenza book, you have to get a laugh. If you just go up and rant about some topic, religion, and why you think it's stupid or whatever it might be, without people laughing, then that's just ranting like you could do on the corner, at people walking by. Stephen Colbert famously did the dinner, the correspondence dinner. And in the interview, he said people, was the Paul Provenza interview, he said people who came to him afterwards and said how brave he was to be like roasting the president right to his face. And he's like, no, I wanted jokes to have punchlines and for people to laugh. So that's how comedians think about it.
But
Yeah.
George W. Bush administration didn't know that he wasn't the person he played on Daily Show.
Right.
I mean, that was what
Well,
was
there's
just
been
amazing. He was invited to do satire, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's what it's about.
Yes.
And then he did it.
There's during
They
that
weren't happy.
the Colbert Report, there were some studies done, and I'm getting this off the top of my head, but this is basically correct. Depending on how far right you were on the political spectrum, you were more likely to think that Colbert was serious. So that's a study in confirmation bias is what I was reading that had this result. So even if you knew that he was telling jokes, and even if you knew that the jokes were roasting conservatives, there was a tendency, the further right you were on the political spectrum, the more likely you believed he was that character.
And this makes success in programs. I mean, they get all in the family,
Mhm.
right? And we lived in Arizona. I was very close to Toronto for the neighborhood church, right? But we visited Iowa, where
Mhm.
both of our families came from. And I was surprised that his dad liked All in the Family. He
Yeah.
insisted on watching the reruns, and I watched it with him. Well, hey, he agreed with Archie.
Yes.
And many of us could see the
Mhm.
extremism on both Mike and
Yeah.
Archie, but somebody agreed with somebody on the program. That's
Yeah.
why it was successful.
All right. So going through the book, I'm now going to give you a few examples of the different topics I go through. So in this past round, I don't have it memorized, nor should you. So Doubting Thomases, God as a character, and creationists. Those are the three main chapters. What I want to say about those three topics for chapters is that those are all things that you can find in the writing or speeches of the so-called new atheists, as well as in stand-up comedians who are doing religious satire, especially in the aughts. And that overlap is what drew my attention all the years ago when I started taking notes and working on this book. It took me 8 years to finish this book once I started working on it. Of course, I was teaching and doing other research, also directing plays. And a friend asked me when it came out, how long did it take you to write this book? I said, it took me about 18 months to write this book. But those 18 months were spread out over 8 years. So if I could actually just sit down, I could write a book in 18 months. But I'm not given those 18 months of that order. Well, it's only a piecemeal over time. Okay, so the first one topic is doubting Thomases. And this is, so first of all, many of you or all of you have heard the story of Doubting Thomas. So Doubting Thomas didn't believe initially in the resurrection, and then supposedly the resurrected Jesus came to him and let him study his wounds, and then that convinced him. And sometimes biblical apologists will say, and this is sometimes, so I apologize for my generalization, will say that this story shows that like skepticism can lead to your faith. Because when asked for evidence, they were given evidence. But the Doubting Thomas's name in Greek has an interesting feature. It refers to twinning. And it's, so I've read a couple different books about this. I'm not an expert on it, but this is what I took away from it. The idea of twinning goes with skepticism, because when you're not sure if something is true, it's almost like there's two branches, right? Either it is true or it isn't true. So Doubting Thomas represents this kind of like a twin perspective of we don't know what the outcome is. So it's like Schrodinger's Thomas. It could be either way until we open the box, we don't know. So we can just say that comedians expressing doubt, like a kind of a skepticism about religious dogma, or any kind of dogma, be it political or something else, institutional. But of course, in this book, I'm looking at a religious satire. See, I'll tell you a joke that will bring this home for you. Right. So in this chapter, I refer to a comedian a lot called Eddie Izzard. So I don't know if there's any Eddie Izzard fans who've seen any of her material. I love Eddie Izzard. I've seen her live one time. So that was great. While writing this book, she came out as trans, which is, of course, 100% okay. It didn't mean I had to go through and change all the pronouns and all the sections relating to Eddie Izzard. Eddie Izzard has this joke, though, that I used to start this chapter, and so I think this is gives you the idea. If there was a God, don't you think he'd afflict Hitler's head off? That is the essential idea of doubt, and for an example of a comedian promoting doubt. In fact, I talk about Bill Maher a lot in this chapter as well because of his film Religulous. So at the time in the aughts, this was kind of a popular or successful movie. And both in the film and in media that he did, like interviews he did on TV to promote the film, he expressed himself as selling doubt. And in the film, there's many scenes where he's talking to like regular people, not religious leaders or priests or something, but just people on the street, that kind of format. And they'll say something, some religious thing that they believe in, and then he'll say, "Do you really believe that?" Remember, there's a section in the film where they're talking about Noah's Ark and the flood. And in a way, all he does to that person is ask them, "Do you really believe that? You really believe that there's a whole flood like that?" So he doesn't directly say, like, "You are stupid." Now, if you watch the film, his attitude, like, sends the message, "Are you really so stupid that you believe this?" But if you take it at his word, which you're not required to, he was not trying to be quite that calling people stupid as much as trying to get them to question, like, are you sure you really believe it? You really think that happened? The movie opens in a scene where he's in a trucker's chapel, which is at a truck stop, and it's like a little trailer. I mean, I would be surprised. This room's probably bigger than the trucker chapel was in the film. And there were just 4 or 5 truckers who had come in for a service. And then he starts asking them this, "You really believe this?" And the one person gets so mad and storms out. Which I don't blame him. They got mad. Bill Maher was picking on them, so to speak. But he says in different interviews and in the film itself, "I'm here selling doubt." And I think you can find a lot of comedians in that era. I just use Eddie Izzard as an example, Bill Maher as an example, of that doubting Thomas. I call it a trope. It's like a repeating motif that you can find. And then, of course, in the New Atheist books, you can find kind of like, do you really believe that type moments. I do want to say, I bet many people in this room know this, but I do cover this in the book, and so we should make this clear. The writers I keep alluding to, Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris, and others, they themselves never called themselves new atheists. That was never like a movement with a manifesto where they got together and said, hey, let's be the new atheists. A magazine writer saw that their books were on the bestseller list, interviewed them, and published an article in which that journalist referred to them as the new atheists. And that's where that sort of neologism comes from. So sometimes in the years since, you'll talk to people who think like that either they're Dawkins is a new atheist, but that the new atheists were like a movement of some kind, which they were not. They were more like independent thinkers that were writing on similar themes. Later, that philosopher, sorry, his name escapes me, the four of them made a video together that got turned into a book called The Four Horsemen. And the video was on YouTube, and I watched it when I was working on this book. The thing is, that video and then the subsequent book that's like a transcript of that video, years later, four of them did not get together in a kitchen and invent new atheism. They were actually like called together, hey, let's do this video, because they'd already established themselves as writers in a similar field. Okay, so we all know that's a brief history of the phrase new atheist. Let me catch up my breath and just double check what I want to do next. Anyone want to interrupt me with a question? I'm going to take a deep breath.
I wanted to ask about go back to the literalism that some religious people, and I was watching a video from Dennis Prager, and he has a big section in the video about art and music, and how he talks about how the composers, the artists back in the ancient times did all this work for God. Like right. Michelangelo did it for God, even though it was the church that was paying them.
Indeed.
They were doing it for money. Anyway, he was talking about Piss Christ, the art installation, and how it was so offensive, and he was saying it was removed and banned and everything. And I went back and looked, and the artist, I forget his name, Sarianto, I think, or something like that. He was a devout Catholic, and he made the installation to say something about the commercialization of Jesus.
Right.
And he even got a thumbs up from Pope Francis.
Okay.
He had an audience with Pope Francis and got a thumbs up.
Okay.
So that kind of reminded me when you were talking about that, how people see it in different light.
Yeah, I don't remember the year that the Kevin Smith film Dogma came out, but it was at least vaguely similar in that he was raised a Catholic, and he did not think when he made that movie that he was attacking Catholicism per se. Like, he made it as a Catholic to express what he had learned as a Catholic and to be sort of maybe to play with some Catholic ideas, but not to deconstruct or destroy. Maybe to destroy, yeah. Again, it's easy to wax kindly with hindsight, but he has described the film as almost like kind of a loving portrayal, even though it has, a shit monster and other ridiculous things that you can see why a religious person might be offended by it. But also, I'm reminded of there was an interview with a filmmaker, and John Landis, the director. So to boil it down to a nutshell, the question before them was, how do you kill a werewolf? And the answer is, any way you want. Werewolves don't exist. Werewolves aren't real, so you can write your story and kill them any way you want. If that ends up with like glittering vampires, then you end up with glittering vampires. But vampires don't exist. So if you want to write a book where the vampires glitter, you have like. And I feel very similar about biblical literalists in that so many denominations and so many different churches, and even without getting in so many different specific ministers or faith leaders or whatever, they all have their version of the werewolf. Like, the Bible can be whatever each person wants them to believe, which in some ways becomes its like shield. Like, it helps it persist because it, in a way, it can't be wrong. In the film Religulous, Bill Maher does interview Ken Ham, who's the guy who runs the Creation Museum, and asks him about like why is it so important that dinosaurs lived with men, and why is it so important for your faith, he says, for this stuff to be so literally true. And Ham offers his answer, and then in this is like one of the famous moments in the film, Bill Maher just stares at him like, really? That's your answer? Okay. I think Ken Ham says to him, I'm not God, are you God? That's like his comeback to one of Bill Maher's doubting questions. Bill Maher goes, no, I'm not God. I don't know what that proves. Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you.
I'd like to interrupt.
But I'd like to ask a question about an issue. I don't think your presentation is going
That's okay.
forward. You showed the graph, the intersection of
Yeah.
satire, religion, 9/11,
Mhm.
you know, personally. It's been my experience that most satire, most comedians, nearly all,
Mm-hmm.
target Christianity, which is easily a legitimate
Right.
target. But none will dare mention Islam. I think of 2015,
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Hebdo,
Mm-hmm.
the slaughter in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
They had the courage to come out, openly mock,
Right.
even had a drawing of the prophet.
Right.
They paid with their lives.
Yes.
Do you think this upsurge post 9/11 in religious satire doesn't involve Islam because comedians they either are very reverent toward that religion,
Right.
or fear reprisal?
So, first of all, thank you for your question. Second of all, what happened? Hebdo was a horrible tragedy, naturally, obviously, for sure.
Well, it was a slaughter, it wasn't a
But-
tragedy.
But just to talk about the 2000s for a second, and this will get to your question. There were definitely 100% comedians who made fun of Islam. Jeff Dunham had a puppet of the dead terrorist. Can't remember what he called that puppet. Thank you, people, for helping me. In which he totally made fun. Louis Black, in the Comedy Central special that he did, he talks about the terrorist kind of specifically, but he kind of, some of it generalizes. And I've seen what I would call the trenches of stand-up comedy. Comedians definitely make jokes at the expense of Islam. I do think that it is less common, but I think that for one feature, first of all, there are definitely going to be comedians who make the conscious choice not to make jokes about Islam because they're worried about their safety. I'm 100% sure that happens. I'm also sure it happens because I do it. Because I will write jokes, and then I'll think of something about Islam that I want to make a joke about, and then I will ask myself, do I really want to tell this joke right now? So it is definitely, there is some kind of reflection of that sort going on. And it might even be more of that now than it was in the aughts.
I mean, again, you mentioned the comics who made fun of Islam or the terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anybody except Hebdo who openly mocked prophet. And anybody who mocks a prophet must be killed. Under the dogma.
You want to add something before? Go ahead.
Actually, I was curious of your opinion, like he talked about, and like you mentioned Jeff Dunham, the intersectionality between, religiousness and, I use a hot button word right now, nationalism are very closely tied.
Mm-hmm.
But, we make fun of things we see in life.
Yeah.
So, do you think, from the perspective of, I assume you're just talking about American comics for the most part here.
Primarily, but not exclusively, but you are correct.
Western sphere of influence then.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, some of the disparity you see between, going after, religions that you might not be as familiar with?
Well, I think that it is definitely a factor that if you're just a normal person bumbling around the United States, most of what you bump into is versions of Christianity, including, not 100%, but that's what's common. I'm Jewish myself, but a Christian majority country by quite a large margin. So that's what is around you. So there is some element to that. And I will say, you can find Muslim comedians and Muslim or Arab American comedians who deconstruct or make fun of Islam, terrorists, and so on. One such comedian is called Dean Obadiah. I don't know if anyone knows him. He has a Sirius XM radio show. I've seen him perform. I've met him. I was not able to get him to sit down for an interview while I was writing this book. But he was, so first of all, he co-produced a film called The Muslims Are Coming. And that was a performance documentary of a group of Muslim American comedians who toured America on kind of a meet a Muslim agenda, like, come to this show. They're all trying to do jokes, like they're all trying to have jokes that land and are funny, but they talk about their lives. He is mixed. He's one of his parents is Palestinian, one is Italian, and one of his sort of well-known 9/11 jokes is that he went to bed Italian and woke up Palestinian. That's the way people saw him changed after 9/11. And as a comedian, now he had to talk about things that he didn't necessarily feel like he had to talk about. And there's a Muslim comedy festival in New York every year as well. And there was another concert film I saw that had 4 or 5 Muslim American comedians separate. It was like just their shows, like a King of Comedies type of thing, but with Muslims.
There's actually a kind of relation to what you were asking.
Mm-hmm.
There's a phenomenal documentary that was produced in 2005, so kind of in the realm of this book, called Looking for Comedy in the Muslim World. And it's all about...
Well, that's an Albert Brooks movie.
Yeah.
So that is like semi-fictional.
Okay.
Just so you know. But it's filmed almost like a documentary.
Yeah.
It's a great film.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, and the other thing to consider, I think, is you make fun of what you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. It would be harder for me to make a Muslim or a joke about Islam because, okay, I'm not tied into that. Whereas if you go to that festival in New York, oh my gosh, you probably get a lot of it. It's like John Mulaney talking about his experiences at an altar boy. I mean, he's been there. He knows that.
I do want to add one other thing as it pertains to this book. During that 8-year journey, working with a couple different editors, at one point an editor sent me an email, very helpful. I love the couple editors I worked with, and said, here's some things that you haven't brought up yet. Are you planning to? And it was like 5 or 6 things. And one of the things on that list was Islamophobia. And because that's also something that intersects new atheists as well as some comedian satirists, like Bill Maher, for example, have been accused of Islamophobia. So has all the major new atheist writers have been accused of Islamophobia. And so I have a blurb, there's like half a page in this book in which I explain why this book is not covering Islamophobia. For one thing, it's a huge complicated topic that should have its own book. I didn't feel like I could treat it fairly as a superficial, like just read a couple articles or interviews and throw something together. On top of that, though, accusations of Islamophobia, like in the pop culture, turn into he said, she said type arguments, where the one person, someone accuses Bill Maher or Sam Harris of being Islamophobic, and then they go, well, I'm not Islamophobic, I'm just fill in the blank. I'm in no position to evaluate the veracity of either of those statements. It's almost like a gossip or rumor mongering. Not to say that it isn't an important topic, I just mean I'm not capable of evaluating them. So it did not seem like appropriate for me to try to spend time. But I did have like this half a page where I explained why I'm not spending time on the topic. Yes, sir.
You said I'm Jewish. And it brought one of my questions to have like, do you really believe that? What is this just like a academic commentary for you, or are you, do you consider yourself like want to be a new atheist, but you kind of answered that when you said I'm Jewish. You're not a Dawkins or a Hitchens or somebody, are you? Or
Well, just for the sake of my own joy, I can't see your name because you're
Austin.
Hi, Austin. Thank you for your question. No, it's a perfectly fair question. So first of all, I was raised Jewish. I am what I call, this is my own expression. You can borrow it if anyone wants to. The world's most highly assimilated Jew. And if you, the Old Testament, there's whole sections about whether or not Jews should assimilate or maintain their cultural identity. So I went the route of maximum assimilation. So I'm not observant. I'm not personally religious. I was never bar mitzvahed because of economic reasons, which is like insane. And I used to tell the story on stage about why I wasn't bar mitzvahed. And then a friend of mine who's another comedian goes, Jerry, that story is so great. No one ever talks about stuff like that. And as we talked about it, I realized that he had this like small glint of anti-Semitism in how he was talking about it, because it's stories like the Jews are cheap. Jerry couldn't even get bar mitzvah. I was like, well, I'm not telling this joke anymore on stage. So, now, but the almost deeper, more personal part of your question is, yes, in 2008, reading the New Atheist, the famous ones, and other writers as well, and as a writer, comedian, academic, I'm like, how can I contribute? What can I add to this conversation that is of value? And if this book had come out before 2012, it would have been part of a zeitgeist that has kind of passed. So now it is academic in nature. When I pitched this book to the publisher, even though it was an academic press, I said, I'm going to write this book in a manner that any comedy fan could read. That's one of the reasons why it's so short, because, I mean, there are probably paragraphs that seem academic and dense, but the book itself is not that dense. Part of what I did is put in many, many examples. So if you are a comedy fan and you're in the middle of reading this book, you're going to see like example after example. I want to make sure I mention at least one more thing while I have time. I was just on a podcast talking about this book. The podcast was 90 minutes long, and I did not get a chance to talk about my favorite part of this book. So I'm going to go to that in a second. But yes, I mean, for me personally, I am a skeptic, non-believer, and there is a part of me that felt like writing this book was contributing to that zeitgeist, even though it had missed it by a decade or so. When it would have. But it is written in a manner for the general public, any comedy fan. In fact, that's what I've said, but again, the Roadies won't do any marketing because it's an academic book. Religion is one of the most popular topics for book sales. And comedy is a very popular topic right now. It's like a big niche topic. There is no other book or podcast that discusses both topics sort of like synergistically. So I do feel like the book was written for a wider audience, even though it does have some academic DNA in it, such as explaining Bakhtin and monologism and dialogism. And I use some classical examples like Shakespeare and the Greeks, and Monty Python, of course, because The Life of Brian is the single greatest satire film ever made, in my opinion. And I show it to students every chance I get. So, my favorite part of this book is the chapter on enacting God as a character. This is a common thing you'll see. It's probably something you won't notice until I pointed it out. So if you've never noticed it, there are many routines. So in comedy, there's a technique. You've definitely seen this. You might not be consciously aware of it, called an act out. An act out is when a comedian says the premise of their joke, but then instead of like just saying a verbal punchline, they act something out. So like Eddie Izzard has a routine where he says, what if Jesus had to proselytize to dinosaurs? And then he does a whole thing of he's Jesus in a room full of dinosaurs trying to explain. And Louis C.K., who of course had some sad ups and downs in his career, but back in the day before those, he did a routine about the environment, in which he said, what do you think God's going to say when he comes back and sees all the animals covered in oil? But then he goes into the character of God, and he's like, what have you done to all my polar bears? It's supposed to be white, not brown, and goes like that. But he embodies the voice of God while he's giving his routine. So act outs are super common. If you watch any comedy special, go to any comedy club, I'll put it if I had to make up a number that I know is true, 99% of the comedians you see are doing act outs. They're generally considered the best type of punchline. Like you get big reactions and applause breaks. So that's a technique that almost every comedian knows and utilizes. But specifically, comedians doing religious satire will say, what do you think God would say? You know, Mark Maron has a thing about if Jesus had lived to 50, he would have been like Elvis. And then he does actually the disciples. Come on, Jesus, I know you used to walk on water. Come inside, take a rest. Things like that. He goes, oh, you think, what do you think Jesus would say? It's the Mark Maron routine. If he walked around the mall during Christmas time. It's like, no. Then he sees the mall, Santa Claus. Listen, fat man, you're just a clown at my birthday party. But he's in the character of Jesus while he's doing that bit. So that's characters embodying the religious characters, of which, especially in the West, God and Jesus are the two most common. There could be others like disciples or Muhammad. Again, you won't see that very often in America, but it does happen. But another version of this I covered in the same chapter, it's like the second half of the chapter, is parody religions, which I think parody religions, for me as a comedy fan, are hilarious. And it's one of my Greek examples from Aristophanes in his play Lysistrata has a scene where the women are trying to stop the war in different ways. They go on a sex strike. They also take over the treasury, take over the money. And at one point, this like magistrate comes in, and they reenact a funeral rite with him. So inside the play, they do a parody of a religious rite that any Greek watching the play would have known what it was an allusion to. Well, in modern times, you can find, or in the 2000s, you can find many examples of comedians. There's something I share almost every Christmas. So if you follow me on Facebook, it's Jerry C. Jaffe, because my father's on Facebook, and he's Jerry Jaffe, so I put my middle initial in there. Almost every Christmas, I put in a comedian from Australia called John Safran. John Safran did a series that I highly recommend called John Safran versus God. And I think there are 8 episodes, and it's similar to Religulous in that he goes around the world and interacts with different religious people, but instead of spreading doubt, he's a little more like, hey, tell me about what you're doing. Like, he's not quite as bulldogish as Bill Maher is. He's a little more like, explain to you. But then in between, he does comedy bits and skits. And he has this skit where he goes to Utah, to Salt Lake City, and goes door to door, trying to convince people to become atheists. If you go on YouTube and put in door-to-door atheist skit, it will be the first thing to come up. And that's an example of parody of what religion does. You probably
So you're familiar with the Church of the Spaghetti Monster?
Yes, I have several pages in this book about the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and Pastafarians. And so I go into the history of that a little bit. And then the creator of that wrote a book that is supposedly outlines the dogma, so to speak. So I read that book as well. But parody religion. And on their website, they like have a Q&A section, and the Q&A section says, is this a parody or are you serious? And the answer is, he gives like a lengthy answer, several paragraphs, so I'm just going in a nutshell, he says, what's the difference? Who cares if we started as a parody or started sincerely, or if people do it as a parody or do it sincerely? What's the difference? Which is a brilliant sidestep of the question and also funny in its own right. The Mormons do a thing, correct me if I'm wrong, of baptizing dead people.
Yeah.
And during the Mitt Romney campaign, his wife's father was a well-known scientist who was a vocal atheist. And they posthumously baptized him. And then this got into the news and brought it to like popular culture for 15 minutes that the Mormons do this. And several comedians did jokes deconstructing this when it happened. Bill Maher did a thing where he created a ritual where he put on like a Halloween cap, like a witch's cap or wizard cap, and he just waved a wand and said, there, now you're not a Mormon anymore. And Stephen Colbert did a thing where he posthumously circumcised all the dead Mormons. He brought out a little toy guillotine and a hot dog. And did some little like magic and then chopped it off and said, congratulations, dead Mormons, you're now dead Jews. And there were some other comedians who did it, but those two with their TV shows were kind of high profile. So that's like a parody religion. And yes, sir.
Were there, so in your analysis, were there other comedians that hit on some of these themes before 9/11?
Yes.
Like, I think of like Carlin.
Absolutely.
One of those.
Carlin gets mentioned in this book more than once. One of the things I mentioned early on in the defining chapter, and I used Carlin and Bill Maher, is there's a type of making a joke about religion, which I'm going to say is more like gentle roasting. It doesn't seem that biting or critical. A whole other person, I'd have to look up her name to be sure, but I learned an expression I use in this book, is the expression charged comedy. So in this other analyst view, charged comedy is when you're focusing your comedy on social change. So early Carlin and early Maher did do some jokes about Jesus or religion, but they were kind of like gentle roasting, not really like focused on social change. The way
St. Anthony, help me find my keys.
Well,
Carlin,
yes, and I pause because like Louis C.K. as the comedian gets in trouble, it becomes hard to talk about their work, so I apologize. But Bill Cosby also has a very famous routine about Noah talking to God.
Yeah.
Yes. What's a cubit? You know, which is an act out, so it's an example of my act out. But also, he's not being like charged, like he's trying to like deconstruct or challenge the Bible. It's just a cute routine that he does. Now, Carlin is a comedian who does, as he recreated himself into a more like socially conscious comedian, as did Richard Pryor. The two of them had sort of very similar like transformations where they were kind of like safe comedians on TV, and then they kind of disappeared for a couple of years, and were like in coffee shops writing new jokes and getting more connected to like communities, and then came back with more of a charge. I will say, the last chapter that I haven't mentioned yet, except in allusion to Mark Maron, is creationism. And this is another topic that New Atheists write about a lot. Every New Atheist book has at least one chapter on evolution versus creationism. But many comedians have covered this topic as well, and of course pre-September 11th. So Bill Hicks is a famous satirist who had several religious satire bits, but including on creationism. And Louis Black had a whole thing on creationism well before September 11th. And he's Jewish, and he talks about like, if you're a Christian and you don't understand the Old Testament, please ask us. It's our book. Jews are everywhere, and we want to help you. Let us know what your questions are. But he does, in that same special, he does a routine about creationism. I think, though, that after September 11th, with New Atheists writing about creationists, you can find comedians who like are very directly attacking the pseudoscience. In general, other pseudoscience topics are attacked by comedians as well, but specifically creationism, yeah.
Don't you think that Star Trek's episodes about Q are kind of comedic attacks on creationism?
I have seen the episodes, but I haven't contemplated them the way that you're suggesting. So you got me with one I don't have any comment about.
When I was going through the range of going from Judaism to humanism to non-theistic humanism, I was trying to explain to somebody, what my concept of God was. And I said, I don't think there's a God, but if there's a God, it's not the person who's looking at us every day, but it's somebody like you who was messing around and got tired of it and left it.
There's an Australian comedian, Jim Jeffries, who was very vocal and bulldogish about religious satires after September 11th. And he has this bit about comparing progress to a train. And at the front of the train, where the engineers are, is where all the scientists are. And then the back of the train is all this dead weight of people with all these old ideas that don't contribute anything. But in between, there's a train car full of agnostics, and they are not helping. Yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned Bill Hicks, and he had a bit about wearing a cross, about people wearing a cross. with the crucifixion. And he says, do you think that Jackie Onassis would wear a rifle?
Right.
Yeah, and making that thing. And that was on David Letterman, and he got banned for that.
Yeah. He did he taped an appearance for David Letterman, and Letterman made the executive decision not to show it.
So have you noticed, like, did people have a harder time with their comedy after 9/11 when they were criticizing religion than?
So this is something that came up with a couple of the comedians I interviewed on my podcast. And one of the things, again, this is sort of like the Paul Provenza, you got to go into clubs or make people laugh perspective, which is, if you imagine like A-list comedians, Seinfeld, Marv would be on that, whomever, all the rest of us, there's like a trickle-down effect. So if Bill Maher is having success with a religious satire, that could inspire people to do more religious satire. So I think in the aughts especially, there was a upsurge of comedians doing religious satire. And the thing that we can't know, like case by case, is how many of them were, shall we say, sincerely trying to do charged comedy, and how many of them were saying, hey, it works for Bill Maher, maybe I'll get booked if I do more religious satire, sort of cynically. And when you're watching an act, there's no way to tell, because the only thing that matters is, do they make you laugh? I do know, Comedy Central is a cable show, so it's not network, so they go by different standards. They definitely had a demonstrable increase in religious satire jokes for the 2 or 3 seasons after September 11th. But I don't know that anyone got booked because they did religious satire jokes. But I guess we could say no one got banned because they were doing it either. So I'm not aware of any direct phenomenon. Something that that has come up recently in the news, and it's well worth coming up, is the comedians who've gone to Saudi Arabia, in particular, other Middle Eastern countries sometimes, and sometimes those gigs pay very well because there's a lot of money over there, and they want Western culture to be happening. But one of the things that comes with that is you are given a list of things you cannot talk about. And of course, Muhammad is one of them. Religion is one of them. The king is one of them.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah.
But didn't Jeff Dunham do Ahmed in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I don't know without. I believe you. I just would have to fact check that.
I think he did. Either that or Abu Dhabi. Maybe. So.
I know he went to Israel, I think.
See,
Maybe it might have been
I would
Israel.
have to check. I wouldn't know for sure. But when Dean Obadiah was on his radio show, this came up at the time a few years ago. This topic was in the air for comedians. And he said, yeah, but realize that when you go on Letterman or The Tonight Show, they give you things that you're not allowed to say. Now, you might be able to tell a joke about Muhammad, although in that case with Bill Hicks, it turns out he wasn't. Letterman later showed that and apologized. And, Bill Hicks died soon after filming that. That was his last TV appearance, I believe. But Letterman didn't know how sick he was at the time either. So he brought on Hicks' mother and apologized to her and then showed the segment. But at the time, it was not shown. So there's a comedian who did a joke about lupus. And he was told, he did it in rehearsal, and he was told that he couldn't do that joke. And he told the joke, but he changed the disease, like it wasn't as good without the way the joke was written. So definitely, some version of that happens on American television, and network television in particular. Yeah.
That makes me think of, I'm not a comedian, but as I know, there's a concept of you punch up, you don't punch down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so some of this may be in that territory and why other religions aren't as approached.
Right.
It's not punching up. The target isn't as fun to punch on as the largest target there is.
So I just recorded a video lecture where I explained punching up. That will be released soon, I hope, on YouTube. But punching up is a common concept in comedy. It has to do with levels of social power, totem of social power in a society. So who's in charge, and then who is oppressed or weak or poor. And wherever you are on that hypothetical ladder, it's generally considered more fruitful to make fun of people higher than yourselves. So to speak, if you're doing satire, it's always at least,
That sounds like,
hypothetically okay to make fun of the president.
that sounds like a cop out. It's like saying Islam is
Well-
a negatively cold religion.
Well, in terms of your concern, I understand what you're
I
saying.
just don't see why comics self-censor. You mentioned fear, I understand that, but have some guts, have, you know,
And there are
Islam is, there's plenty of comic material.
And there are comedians who do tackle it. I do think, and this overlaps with the concept of punching down, is, for example, when Bill Maher has done jokes on that topic, it's been called Islamophobic. So now, when you're some random comedian and you're thinking, well, if I do this joke on Islam or Muhammad, will people think I'm Islamophobic? And maybe person A might not care if people think they're Islamophobic, but comedian B might. Yeah.
Yeah, just going back to stuff.
Please do.
Letterman, someone going on Letterman, what were they told they couldn't talk about?
Well, there were just two examples. Bill Hicks did a routine on religion that wasn't shown. This other comedian had a joke that mentioned lupus, and he was told he couldn't mention that disease. And of course, the next thing I'm going to say has changed over the generations, so we can take it with a grain of salt in 2025. But certainly, there's limits on swearing. So there's certain words you just can't use.
So you're saying that the fact that if you goes to Saudi Arabia, you can't talk about jokes about the kings, it's no different than here?
So
is that the point you're trying to make?
Thank you for asking for clarification. I do want to say not to sidestep your question, but to make a wee point. I was actually directly referring to the comedian Dean Obadiah said that. So that was his take on the controversy, which I was then sharing with you his interpretation of being handed a list of things you can't talk about if you perform in the Middle East. Now, I, of course, as an American who is a champion of free speech, as most comedians are, bristle when I hear that, nor do I think they're exactly analogous. But what is pretty close is that there can be limits on what you can say as a comedian in certain venues. So,
Ricky Gervais on his latest Netflix special
talks
about a joke that he was going to say at the Golden Globes that producers were trying to talk him out of saying this or that. I don't even remember what it was, but yeah, even he who does this very edgy stuff on his special had to pull back a little for the Golden Globes.
Well, he is certainly mentioned in this book. He has a great routine about Noah's Ark, which I don't know if you've seen it, but he takes a children's book about Noah's Ark and he uses a projector and he goes through the book page by page. Okay, to the best of my knowledge, it's a real book, and it's hilarious. There are comedians who do jokes about Islam, Muhammad, and there are Arab American comedians who do and Muslim American comedians who do. I do want to say, I don't think the concept of punching up versus punching down is itself intrinsically a cop-out. I think the comedians should think about who is the butt of their joke. This is not what you said, but I just want to give an extreme example just so you can see what I mean. In Nazi Germany, a lot of comedians made a lot of money doing a large amount of anti-Semitic humor. Because in that culture, that is what the people in charge wanted to hear. So they were clearly oppressed people in danger, and that's like an extreme but clear example of punching down. Also, in comedy, we should be able to punch up, but in the era of Trump, that is a problem. I was doing the show, and I had a stupid Trump joke. It wasn't even like that cutting, kind of low-hanging fruit type of joke. But one person at the back of the room lost their mind. So I have to say, 100 people in a room, even if they did or didn't think the joke was funny, only one person reacted. And my impression is that when you hear the comedian say, which if you listen to my podcast, you'll hear at least 10 comedians say this, oh, I don't want to do religion because it's going to split the room. Or politics. I don't think it splits the room. Most people in a comedy show are there for comedy. And even if you tell a joke about the president or person they voted for, they know it's jokes. And even if they don't think it's funny, they know there'll be more jokes later in the show. So, in Ohio, 51% of people voted for Trump or whatever. So if you have a comedy show and there's 100 people, you can assume If you want to like guess, I guess probably over half the people in this room might have voted for Trump. I don't know if that's true, because first of all, I'm not sure that Trump voters go to comedy shows. So there's a guess there. But I also think, even if there are Trump voters there, they know they're at a comedy show, and if a stupid Trump joke is told, or even a serious Trump joke is told, they shouldn't be too surprised. So I've never had like half the room stand up and riot because I told a Trump joke or a religion joke.
Comedian Steve, what's his name, Hofstetter?
I interviewed him on my podcast.
Yeah, I think they tend to go to his shows to razz him.
Right. Well, he's famous for his videos of him working the audience.
Getting heckled.
Yeah, dealing with hecklers, and he was an early adapter of YouTube. So in the YouTube world, he's quite famous, like millions of views of his videos. I run a show out in Little Mentor, Ohio, in a bar, and I got him to come out and do it. And he films every set because he doesn't know what he's going to put on his YouTube channel. And we're in like a little room like this, and the bar is like just the next room, but there's like an open alcove. In the bar, somebody was having a birthday party, and it got really loud, and he started roasting the birthday party, and then that became his next video. So there's a video from several years ago, so it's probably hard to find of him in our comedy show. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if during Nazi Germany there were comedians making jokes about Christians too, as well as Jews? And are there jokes now here against Judaism? I mean, questioning it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, I was seeing a lot of satires. I mean, the extremism, whatever like that. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, but it's similar to Fiddler on the Roof. I think you'll sometimes see in movies or TV shows that kind of, I do say sometimes, it's not super frequent, kind of a gentle roasting Judaism. But of course, with the military action in Palestine right now, it's a hard topic to talk about. I'm not saying there are no comedians trying to talk about it, because I'm sure there are, but it is pretty difficult.
But I mean, somebody asked about the jokes against Islam.
Yes.
But even the idea that Palestinians are Muslim is wrong. I mean, there's Christian Palestinians.
Yeah, of course.
Probably some atheists probably didn't say so, right?
Yeah, possibly.
And my impression with the new so-called new atheists, I mean, I was kind of following that pretty close through that time because I'm old. But what was it? They had observed how fast the gay community made progress once they came out.
Yes.
So they wanted to make it okay to say you were not religious.
Yes.
Right? And then
I think that's articulated in some of the books.
You think you're alone.
Let me ask, there's a lady behind you. Yes, ma'am?
I guess, would you say then, from, I assume you've done looking through would you, and you also are a comic, all this stuff, would you say that, in response to, obviously, like, we probably don't have a ton of Hindi comics, or, people who are really big into, like, a bunch of Taoist jokes.
Right.
I guess,
You have one Buddhist joke in my routine, but I may be the only one.
But what I'm saying is, I assume that a lot of comics write what they're familiar with.
Yeah.
So not just because of hecklers, but because it's much easier to make, actually really funny jokes instead of simply mocking whatever public persona a group might have.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Well.
Oh, no, what I was gonna ask
Go ahead.
was, do you see a curve aligning with that basically? Like, so Christianity is the most popular, then probably Islam and Judaism, and then down from there.
Well, those are the three Abrahamic religions, which are dominant in Western culture and in other parts of the world as well. So that's certainly the case. And it's hard to know for sure, but I've seen estimates that there's probably something like 10,000 religions worldwide. So yes, you will hear jokes about the Abrahamic religions in Western culture, and very few jokes about the other 9,997 religions that may or may not exist around the world. I do think that in the case of Islam and Judaism in the United States, they are both small minorities that have, in like pop culture, and also more severe ways, experienced anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And that creates a cultural context in which it's difficult to make jokes. Dave Chappelle did a joke in his monologue on Saturday Night Live where he said, "There's one thing I've learned in show business is that two words that don't go together are the and Jews." And he was attacked for being anti-Semitic for that one joke. So, again, Dave Chappelle's edgy and probably has said anti-Semitic things. I don't know, I haven't watched all of his routines, but he's definitely like a brave speech type comedian who seems like he'll say whatever he wants.
Which is odd, because it's my experience that Jews are probably make fun of themselves more than any other culture.
There is some of that, and I interviewed a rabbi for my podcast, but he asked me not to record it. So it was just a personal interview, it turned out. And he gave, also Steve Hofstetter and I discussed it. Steve Hofstetter went to seminary to become a rabbi, but dropped out like in the last year. I don't know if you know what people go to seminary, but it's common to go to seminary and then come out an atheist. So after 3 years of seminary, he realized he didn't believe any of this, and he couldn't be a good faith become. Yes.
I mean, they're not trained to do anything else. It's a problem.
Well, that's why he became a comedian. Probably wasn't trained to do anything else either.
Do you know of any comedian who specializes in jokes on Abraham? He can knock off 3 religions.
Well, Kierkegaard has done some stuff about Abraham. That's the only thing I can think of. Yes, sir.
So, comedians do not talk about religion for fear of splitting the room.
Yes.
Is the argument of your book that the new atheists and the events of 9/11 created the opportunity for comedians to introduce religion in their comedy?
I think it's part of the zeitgeist of it, yes. That would be another way that's parallel to the new atheist books themselves. I do think that the comedians like Louis Black and Bill Maher, who were sort of at the forefront of being like high-profile comedians who in the aughts did a significant amount of religious satire, we're already doing material like that to some degree, but post-September 11th, and again, I mean, I have interviewed Louis Black, not Bill Maher, so I don't, you don't know what's in people's minds or hearts, so I don't know why. Their decisions could be commercial, like, hey, if I make Religulous, I'll make $1 million, I don't know what his motivation was, but taking him at face value, he did seem to be like the new atheists, reacting to religious extremism and having success with it in his career. Because of whether it's self-censorship or censorship from network television, it's hard to tell minutely, like on a granular level, like each individual comedian. And one of the things that happens, which I allude to in the book, but it's so hard to document because live stand-up comedy is a performing art like any other theater or dance or something. It disappears the moment you do it. So live comedy, like there's hundreds of comedy clubs across the country, we'll never know what's going on in all of those clubs. And I'm sure, based on personal experience and people I know, that still the majority, like 51+% of just like working comedians who tour the country, do not talk about religion or politics in their act because they're going to go into random clubs in different cities and states, and they want to succeed professionally.
Is that one of the points of writing your book, to soften that and let people joke about religion?
Well, it would be a goal, but I don't know that it's like explicitly in the agenda of the book. But just keeping the conversation going, making it something to talk about. Just want to make sure you had your hand up.
I used to be a big fan of Jeff Dunham.
Okay.
But then he came to Toledo.
Okay.
And his whole bit was horribly right-wing.
Right.
He made Walter into Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was awful.
Right.
If I hadn't have been writing with someone else, I would have just left.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with right-wing comedy? You gotta laugh.
Well, he was throwing red meat to the audience.
The topic of what's called conservative comedy is its own like genre that's worthy of study.
But I've never seen any of that on tape, so I don't know if he's doing this off the record.
Yeah. We got about 5 more minutes.
So, I mean, thank you for, of course, hosting me. I hope this was in some way either elucidating or entertaining. Certainly, if anyone has
I think the entire spectrum.
Well, it is said, I'm not even sure it's true, but it's definitely like the mythos is that stand-up comedy is the last bastion of free speech at this point. And I think anyone who would embrace that sentiment would agree philosophically with what you're saying, in the sense of all topics should be available to write jokes about. So what happens is you go from the philosophical to a comedy club in Toledo, and it's your job to make people laugh, and if they don't laugh enough, you might not be invited back. And also, you know, it's like Spider-Man, free speech might be a power, but it comes some responsibility. So what is it you're actually trying to say?
And it should be relatable too. I think that has a lot to do with it. Whether or not you laugh or not is if it's relatable.
Speaking of Mark Maron, who I know you brought up.
Yeah. I've met him briefly, but I've never got a chance to interview him.
Yeah. He's and kind of speaking on the topic of conservative comedy, he's kind of had a few interviews where he's really gone off on, like, you might call it the Boston comedy sphere.
Yep.
And essentially, I think, you know, what he was saying was, okay, in 2026 now, you know, the legislation with, you know, ICE agents and Minnesota, stuff like that, he's saying, you know, when are the trans jokes going to stop? You know, when are the immigrant jokes going to stop? Like, is this really this brave act of free speech to be, you know, repeating the talking points of the most powerful man in the world, in the federal government? So, like, I don't know how I would frame that as a question.
Right.
But, like, do you think there's like any kind of continuity with like past comedy, or is this like more of a new phenomenon that's going on?
Well, conservative, I don't know if you're alluding to conservative comedy or the blogosphere of the Joe Rogans of the world that Mark Maron is alluding to. To me, again, it's just sort of like an almost easy way to talk about it, is the concept of punching down again. You know, I'll give you just an example that's not political, and then you'll all semi-agree. So I teach comedy, and the students do stand-up comedy in a bar for their final. And I help them write their jokes, and we practice in class, and they're all well prepared for at least a chance at success. And the bar that lets us do this show, some of my students, this was a few years ago, went to the bar to check it out, which that's a good idea. If you're going to do an open mic or something, why not go ahead of time and see the show so you know what the layout is and what to expect. But the day they went, there was no comedy show. That bar owner, once a month, has a dinner for children with Down syndrome. And they happened to accidentally go to that bar at that time. And there was this dinner, and there were families with children with Down syndrome, including the children. And they were taken aback because they weren't expecting it. Normal human reaction. But the one young adult, she said, Jerry, it was so hilarious, I want to do all my jokes about going to that dinner. And then I said, please don't do that. We've spent weeks writing jokes that might be funny. Just do the jokes we've been practicing. And then she went up there and proceeded to do 5 minutes about going to this dinner with children with Down syndrome and making fun of the children with Down syndrome. And the room just totally like chilled. No one laughed. No one was on her side. And now, does this mean that there cannot be jokes about disabilities or illness? I mean, it was 10 years ago. I'm perfectly fine. I had thyroid cancer. I do jokes about cancer in my act sometimes. It's my personal experience, and I try to make them relatable and humorous. But in a free speech way, you say, of course, why couldn't somebody hypothetically do jokes about the situation of Down syndrome? But this case, it was making fun of the children with Down syndrome, which nobody in the room found funny. That's a pretty clear example of punching down. You raised your hand. Sorry, the lady behind you raised your hand. Sorry for pointing. Yeah. If you want to do like a last quick question, I'll try to finish.
It's not exactly in relation to the book, but have you seen a change in the way satire has changed through social media since it's become so prevalent?
The only thing, I'll say two things to try to be brief. One is, I think in the clubs and in the comedy specials of 2026, there is less religious satire now than there was 10 years ago. I'm probably not going to do my exercise where I get out my worksheet and count jokes, but I just don't see it as much casually. I will say the prominence of Trump has changed the energy in the room. And that is something I asked Louis Black about. And what he said is, if you just say something that triggers Trump fans, your show is going to fall apart. So he said it's become a very narrow needle that you have to thread where you can talk about social issues and make jokes about them. But he said just don't bring up Trump's name, especially early. At least that's his approach. You just talk about social things. You want to do jokes about like guns. And there's a story of a person who was doing a gun demonstration at his church and shot his wife accidentally. So he'll talk about that story, and which is a real story, and make jokes about that, but without ever bringing up like the Second Amendment or Trump.
I don't see why Trump provides so much material.
Correct.
Trump pretty much makes a parody of himself. If you ever listen to a speech, or
yeah. In 2015, I started a notebook where I wrote down the most ridiculous things Republican candidates said, and I was going to create a character on YouTube where I would do speeches that was all literal things Republican candidates said, strung together into one speech, and then Trump went down an escalator and did that, and it immediately killed my bit. Never going to work, because he's doing it already.
I always get like when he says, like you've never seen before. No matter what he says.
Maybe the reason, like the Down syndrome, that some topics and maybe some religion are harder to separate the person from the beliefs. I'm thinking, I remember years ago, I had an occasion about Hindus in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and they said when they moved to the United States, people said, well, are you a practicing Hindu? And they didn't understand the question. It's who they are. And then it was in the 1990s, I was in my 50s, before I ever knew there was anything except Orthodox and Reform Jews. And I taught Presbyterian Sunday school that the Jews believe the Old Testament, right? I mean, whatever, like that. And then I learned that there are conservative congregations and Reconstructionist congregations where they don't believe in God. Or my jaw dropped. I mean, and I think a lot of people don't understand it. So it's hard to separate the person, and attacking people is bad.
I'll make this my last comment because we do need to finish up. And then, of course, I'll still be here if anyone wants to chat. I did bring some copies of my book. The hardcover copy, because it's an academic book, is quite expensive, which $50 plus. But also, you can go online and get the paperback or the ebook for about $15.
Is it on Amazon?
It is, yeah. Which is, Mark Maron does a thing when he does his creationist bit, where up front, and I paraphrase a little bit, he starts by kind of phrasing it as he's talking about these crazy biblical literalists, not all Christians in general. So there's a way that some comedians will start this topic to make it clear to the audience, I'm not making fun of you. You're a normal, good-hearted Christian. I'm talking about these extremists that are easy to make fun of, and then it can make the audience feel safe. Yes, correct.
And you're talking about how many religions, but I have read that there's over 40,000 denominations of Christianity.
Right. That's one of the problems is how do you count, of course.
To call back to your beginning, you said you learned comedy from watching people in Cleveland. So you're like the Jane Goodall of Cleveland.
A little bit. Well, we only have this room for so long. We have to clean up. So let's stop there. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you didn't talk.
Our next event is January the 24th at the Sylvania branch, and we're going to be talking about hobbies. So if you have a hobby and you want to attend, RSVP to it, and then we'll make some time so you can discuss it. And then, like I said, we're going to have a chili cook-off next month at some point. And thanks, everybody, for coming. And again, we had snacks. If you want some snacks and a sign-up for our email list, thanks a lot.